Good evening, everybody.
This meeting is being recorded.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Greg Johnson. I am the Program Administrator for the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. This is a roundtable to discuss why is equity important in infrastructure. So as one who has been in the field of infrastructure for coming on 40 years now, I've seen a lot of things that have happened over the course of those 40 years, and also some of the results of inequitable treatment. You know, starting from when railroads were first sited in the United States and properties taken, to the freeway building boom of the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Equity has never been a concern in those matters. But today, with this administration, we have seen a refocusing on transportation and a focus on what equity can mean in transportation. So our program, the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program, has been committed to making sure that our program has equitable processes as well as equitable outcomes. Why is it important? If you look around the country and you see how the interstate system divided minority communities, you will see the devastation that happened in those communities. If you look at the wealth that was created by the contracts that were awarded to help build the interstate system, and how none of those contracts went to majority minority firms, you will see how equity is played out in a disparaging way in the construction of our transportation system. So this is an important topic that is near and dear to my heart, and it's near and dear to this program's reason for being. So with that, I want to introduce to you our Johnell Bell, who is our equity program advisor, our program conscience for all matters equity. So Johnell, I will kick it over to you to introduce yourself and start the panel.
Well, thank you, Greg, and thank you for your leadership relative to equity as well as stewarding this program. Good afternoon and evening, everyone. My name is Johnell Bell, and my pronouns are he and him. And as Greg indicated, I have the pleasure of being your moderator this evening. We have a terrific panel, and so I hope you are just as excited as I am to really unpack what does it really mean to integrate equity into infrastructure. First up, we have Miriam Holliday. Miriam is the Chief Executive Officer of Workforce Southwest Washington, also referred to as WSW. WSW funds organizations that help people get jobs or training to advance in their careers and assist companies to recruit, train, and retain their workers. A critical element of equity is how do we ensure that we are preparing the next generation of workers. We also have Emily Thomas Barota. She is a Senior Associate Equity and Policy at Espousal Strategies, LLC. She's a public and governmental affairs professional with a wide range of experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. We also have Aiden Gronauer, is the Civil Rights Manager at the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program. Aiden has worked in the public sector, actively advancing equity and civil rights for over a decade. We also have Gabby Brazil, who is a Senior Equity Consultant, Project Manager, and co-founder of the WSP Equity Center of Excellence with WSP. She specializes in equity services for public projects, supporting public agencies to develop operational and cultural practices to adopt and sustain equity. And finally, we have my good friend and partner, Lisa Schauer, who is a president of Point North Consulting. On the IBR program, Lisa is a co-facilitator for the Community Advisory Group and is proud to have served as a strategic communications consultant lead for the first 18 months after the program restarted in 2022. Panel, thank you all for joining us tonight. And just a note for participants in the Zoom world or the Zoom room, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions. If you look to the bottom of your screen, you should see it available. You may have to click the More button if you are joining via mobile device. We will now go to our first question of the night. And this is a question that I will open up to the whole panel, which is, you were asked to pick a tagline and or quote. Could you read it and tell us how you bring that energy to your work? And we will kick it off first with Aiden.
Thank you, Johnell. Thank you, everyone. That's a great question. So the tagline that I put forward as the quote is, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere." Many of you may know that's from the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. The rest of the quote reads, "We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." And to me, this means we are all connected as human beings in this ecosystem we call life. And we are all, especially those with power and privilege, responsible for eliminating systems of oppression and injustice that impact anyone, especially vulnerable and marginalized communities. So in my work, I bring this energy actively by helping ensure that underserved and underrepresented communities have economic opportunities on this project, that the workforce reflects the diversity of the region, and that everyone feels welcome and included on the project, and that equity priority communities are actively engaged, their voices are heard, and that no further harm is done to these communities as we rebuild the Interstate Bridge and help repair the past harms through creative solutions for the future in which everyone thrives. Again, equity work is not a zero-sum game.
Powerful words by Dr. King. Thank you, Aiden. Lisa, what speaks to you?
Thank you, Johnell. The quote that I really try to live my life by is one by Malala Yousafzai, and it is, "When the world is silent, even one voice becomes powerful." And the work that I do and the work that I'm proud to have been a part of on this program and in other spaces as well is really about lifting voices that haven't been heard. And it's about finding ways to build trust. And it's about amplifying the stories of real people that are really impacted by what we're doing and what we can do together. So that's the quote that I chose, and really kind of the way in which I feel like I lead my life and show up in the work that I have the privilege to be part of.
Thank you for that. Gabby, we'll go to you next.
Thanks, Johnell. So the quote that I selected for this evening is a quote from Maya Angelou, and the quote is along these lines. People will forget what you said and they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that this is a really powerful quote because it, to me, speaks to the humility of self-awareness, understanding how you come into a room, the balance of power within a room, bringing empathy into your work. And so I think about how it guides me in acting with intention, in listening to understand instead of listening to respond, and the ways that that sort of sets an example for my staff. Also helps me when I am in a position of being a teacher as it relates to teaching about equitable practices to people that have different starting points in that learning process. And also thinking about how to build trust within project teams and help people hear and understand each other.
Thank you for that. Emily?
Yes, so the quote that I chose is from Audre Lorde, and it says, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own." And I chose this quote because the concept expressed here is really at the core of how I view and approach advocacy work. I think it's incredibly important to acknowledge your own privilege and maybe opportunities that you have had that others in, communities that you come from or other underrepresented communities have not had. And how I approach my work is a strong sense of social responsibility, right? Is to look outside yourself at problems that just affect you in your life, and understanding that there's a lot more out there that others go through that you will never experience, but that are incredibly important and impact their quality of life. And that's really the only way we can make progress in healing the legacy of injustice and institutional racism in our society, and in particular, infrastructure projects. Thank you.
Powerful words. Thank you. Miriam?
Yeah, thanks for the question. A quote that has come up for me time and time again in this work and throughout my career is from Margaret Mead. It's never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. I have found through my career that I've worked on smaller teams, and I have really been drawn to the small collective will of really committed and strong and passionate advocates in our community. And I think at the same time, it's exhausting work, and it's important, I think, to lift up, empower, and really, motivate ourselves to stick with this really important work. And so that quote sticks with me and is, I think, a great reminder for my team and also my board of directors as we continue down this path.
Awesome. And we'll wrap up with Administrator Johnson.
So the quote that I chose, and it has been an inspiration for me throughout my career, is of Malcolm X: by any means necessary. And how that speaks to me is that there's not just one solution to the inequity problems in transportation. It takes folks in different seats, in different positions, who care and who are willing to change the paradigm to move equity forward. You can't be shy about it, and you have to employ different techniques and tactics and strategies to get it done. So by any means necessary.
I already know we're off to a good start when we have both sides of the continuum, when we have King being quoted as well as Malcolm X. So that is a rich panel. We go to our second question, and this question is a two-part question. The first part is for Emily, Lisa, and Aiden. And it's, are there things IBR is doing regarding equity that you think are working well? And then I want Miriam and Gabby to be thinking about the second part of this question, which is, are there things you think IBR should do more of, or something we should try doing? So why don't we kick off with you, Lisa?
Thank you, Johnell. There are so many things that I am proud of that the IBR program is doing as it relates to equity. I really believe this program is leading in a way that programs that are complicated and that are big are trying to achieve. And we have two states that are both invested in walking this talk, which is important for me, that it isn't just words that we use that go on a website, that it's actually the way in which we practice. And I think first and foremost, having equity leadership dedicated on the program, having an equity advisory group on the program provides us with that leadership and that guidance that helps us even know how to use the right words to describe the work we're doing together. As Administrator Johnson mentioned, equity is both a process and an outcome. That is so much a part of what we're learning together on how we do this work. So I will say, from my perspective, communication strategies are really about trying to ensure that we're meeting people where they are. And those are buzzwords that are used all the time. And the difference that I see on this program is we're showing up and we are meeting people where they are. And that means having to do things differently, and not just one way, but multiple ways. So where in the past we might have just stood up a poster and sat at a cafeteria and said, hey, we're going to be here for a couple hours, come chat with us and we'll tell you about the bridge. Instead, this community engagement approach, this communication strategy is about showing up and being in all the places, which is a commitment and an investment that I just don't see happening across the country in the same way in which both Oregon and Washington have shown up to really support this replacement bridge by really listening intentionally, by really showing up and really creating a conversation with those in the community, particularly those that have traditionally never been engaged with. And we're doing it in a way that we're recognizing the value. We're implementing incentive programs to participate. We're really adapting how we move forward with our engagement strategies based on their input. So there are a lot of things, Johnell, that I think we can be proud of in this program. And I think from my perspective, it's about really walking the talk of the values that we're sharing as part of our communication out to the community, and then actually showing up and really implementing those strategies with our community.
Thank you, Lisa. Maybe a follow-up. Your firm, Point North, has been a lead woman-owned DBE firm in helping to stand up our communication strategies and tactics within IBR. And one of, as principal equity officer, one of, I think, the great successes that I think we've had is telling the stories of our diverse community as to how they actually used a bridge and what the bridge means to them. Unpack that for our audience. How have you, as sort of the communications lead and advisor to Administrator Johnson in the program, embarked on doing that work? I mean, ultimately, we could have equity policies, but if you're not communicating those policies, it's as good as the paper is written on. How have you all put life and you know, breathe life into sort of those communication strategies?
Oh, that's a great question, Johnell. Thank you. We've teamed and partnered with, I think, our equity team. And so it's embedded and integrated into all of our approach. I think Gabby mentioned, based on the quote that she chose, the word listening is so critically important to communications. And I think we're showing up to first listen. And in listening to our community, which means a lot of different engagements, we are hearing stories, and we're trying to communicate what those stories are, because we all know that this is an awesome bridge to do incredible engineering on. But it isn't just about concrete and steel. It's about real stories and real people that are trying to get back and forth across this bridge, that are trying to connect. And I remember hearing early on in the program, a mom who at night drives over the bridge from Washington with cans over to Oregon to be able to just get the 5 cents that she can recycle that can for, because it is the difference between making her rent payment and being able to keep her 3 kids in the apartment that they live in. And it's those stories of what that bridge really means. And yes, it's about really kind of making sure that the bridge is safe and it's modern, but it's also about helping our communities to be able to get to their jobs, to be able to feed their families, to be able to advance, and to move in a way that maybe they would not have been able to if that bridge didn't exist. And I think what I've seen from our leadership is a real commitment to listening to our community and finding ways to show up and meet our community where they are. So we're definitely doing things differently, but I think it's really about we're connecting with our community because we're first listening.
Thank you. Aiden, our civil rights lead. What does this question mean to you?
Thank you. This is such a great question. So, For me, I think the Interstate Bridge Replacement Program is doing an excellent job centering equity, both in processes and outcomes. Some examples that I can think of is we're really raising the bar and setting a new watermark, so to speak, of what's being done here on infrastructure projects, from bringing in equity and community advisory groups in the very beginning and their voices being listened to and embedded in, the process from the very start, and they'll continue with us throughout the journey, to, building an equity framework very early on, and an equity lens that we're holding up all of our decisions to make sure we're in alignment, to bringing in folks like yourself, Johnell, as our, principal equity officer. We also have a principal climate officer as well. I think that is very unique to this project and shows that we're serious about it. I think we're pulling, best practices, certainly from the region, but also we're looking across the nation for best practices. And if there isn't one out there that really fits the needs of our community, we're looking to build something and create it new. At the same time, we're also focusing on the unique needs of our community here. We have some uniqueness with, a large population of people with disabilities in the region that we're focused on and want them to have, access to the bridge and the highways, et cetera, as well as work opportunities. And so looking at, taking what our standards, whether it be, equity priority community areas, and expanding that definition to include all of the marginalized and underrepresented communities in our area. So, I think we really are going above and beyond and setting a new precedent of the way things can be done in a really equitable manner for mega projects. So I'm excited about what IBR is doing so far.
Thank you for that, Aidan. Emily?
Yeah, I would really like to echo a lot of what Lisa and Aidan said. I think one of the main things that demonstrate the program's commitment to equity is the funding commitments that they have made for the Equity Advisory Group, for extensive community engagement, for an equity team and principal equity officer. A lot of times equity and inclusion are great talking points. It looks awesome on a website, but it's, where's the money to back it up? And I really think that the IBR program has shown that they are really dedicated to that. And, in my role in working with the Equity Advisory Group, this group has really been great in being kind of a guiding light for the program, and really grounding us in considerations of equity and what that impact actually means for people. There's a lot of technical information about the bridge and decisions that are being made. And I think, hearing from this group and presenting this information to the group kind of helps center us back on, well, what does this actually mean for someone's day-to-day life? So I think that that's just been a really great opportunity for the program to hear directly from folks. And as Aidan said, the equity framework that group was really crucial in spearheading and helping to create, that document has continued to be a guiding light for the program and all the decisions that are being made. And it's really helping to hold us accountable as well, to make sure that we're living up to the objectives that we put forward from the beginning. And I think another demonstration is the fact that Administrator Johnson is at all of the EAG meetings, providing, updates directly to these folks, getting their questions, and being able to clarify things and share, really crucial decision points that are occurring at the time. So yeah, I think all of those are just really great examples of the great work that the program's doing.
And Administrator Johnson, I'd love to offer an opportunity for you to offer any reflections. You are someone who has spent a career in transportation on both coasts. You have been a steward of many mega projects. How have you seen IBR sort of lean into equity in ways that perhaps you've not seen it in other ways?
Well, as others have said, the structure that has been put in place and the funding of that structure shows that there is a seriousness of intent to get some things done differently. So we still are in process. We're going to grow, we're going to learn, we're going to do some things, we're still listening very intently to the community in ways that I have not seen in my 40-year history in transportation. So I think that the big things of having a equity advisory group, planning for how we're going to bring DBEs in, how we're going to do workforce are fantastic. But I think it's some of the small things that this team does tremendously well. We show up. We're at events. We're talking to DBEs. We're talking to the community about how they can be a part of this. And opening that door is one of the first key steps to getting to equity, because if folks don't know how they can be a part of it, they won't be a part of it. So we have been very intentional about opening doors and letting folks come in and talk to us and see how they can be a part of this program. So I am proud of all the steps we are taking, and I think we will be a model nationally for how mega projects are done through an equity lens.
Thank you, Administrator Johnson. And now to question number 2 for Miriam and Gabby. To rephrase it again, are there things you think IBR should do more of, or something we should try doing? And maybe Gabby, with your lens, perhaps help us unpack that question a bit.
Sure. So I think there are 3 things that come to mind for me in terms of strategies that can build on what the IBR program has already delivered in the equity space. So I understand that there are lunch and learns or education spaces that you all have created for knowledge share around equity topics that happen on a recurring basis. I think one of the ways to build on that effort would be to do more discrete equity trainings that are designed for different technical disciplines. So in other words, have an equity training that's specific for engineers and the tasks that they work on and the realm that they have control over. Same for planners, environmentalists, your public engagement experts who are already preaching to the choir there, I can see, but making sure that we have discrete equity training opportunities, because what I find in my work as a best practice is that there's value to sharing those narratives and those human stories that the previous panelists were just discussing, but technical experts often don't know how to take that back to their desk. When they get back to their desk, so to speak, what do they do? And those actions, I think, are things that we can talk through based on tasks and scope, et cetera, for specific disciplines. And that makes equity not only a shared responsibility and accountability, but it also makes it digestible. A lot of these human stories, especially for folks that may not have that lived experience, it can be a weight, right? So how do we sort of frame it in a way where we say, yes, this is the gravity of the disparities, this is the gravity of the inequities, but here's the role that you can play in doing things differently going forward. I think people need that level of specificity in order to go back to their desk and feel like they can action equity. The second thing I would recommend is thinking about community agreements, specifically among decision makers. So this could be, it doesn't necessarily have to be one community agreement. There can be more than one that is maybe within a project team or an organization, or between project teams from different organizations. And I recommend that because equity, I sort of think of as an emerging awareness and practice for this industry. It's not necessarily a new concept, but it's in terms of its adoption by our industry as a whole. And so in that way, we are building the plane and learning how to fly it at the same time. And a community agreement is a great way to set some ground rules to help us be successful in collaborating with each other, and also help us get in front of some of those common challenges that projects, and especially large scale projects, face. timeline, budget, politics, political will, those sorts of things that can sometimes pull us away from our intentions as time progresses. Community agreements could be a great way to sort of center the gravity, center the group or groups that are working on a project. Because even though those are all sort of standard things that come with the territory, for a lot of our projects, they're amplified when you're trying to integrate equity into those projects. And then the third thing I would recommend is thinking about, I heard really great insight. I share the school of thought that there is equity in process and there's also equity in outcomes, and one does not happen without the other, right? But in terms of equitable outcomes, I like to encourage clients to think about near-term, mid-term, and long-term outcomes, and what those considerations or actions might be to build up to those milestone points. That again helps equity to be digestible. It helps us to focus. In some ways that can be cost effective, or whether that's from a resource perspective or a time perspective as well. It helps the team to focus a little bit. It also helps us set expectations with the community. A lot of times on these larger projects, we're talking about long-term timelines. And sometimes with equity communities, when we're bringing them to a workshop about a project that wouldn't manifest for years, they're telling you, they're giving you input that is urgent to them, right? In their mind, it's a thing that they'd like to see now, or an issue that they'd like to see addressed now. So having the near-term, mid-term, and long-term set up to the outcomes helps to sort of set expectations around what we can deliver and when. And the last thing that I'll say about doing that process of near-term, midterm, and long-term is that it also allows us as decision makers to think about which of those outcomes do we have direct authority or control over, and which do we have indirect control over, meaning we're aware of it, but we maybe need to act as an influencer because a partner might be better suited to actually address that equitable outcome.
Thank you for that wise counsel. Now we'll go to Miriam.
Thanks, Johnell, and 100% everything Gabby said. I have been just super thrilled to be a part of this process, and I think that we are right in the space to bring to the conversation community benefit agreements, and I agree with Gabby that would be, I think, a priority, should be a priority of this project as we get into the next, into the space around what does this look like for our local community. And in my work, my specific focus is around economic opportunity, and so the jobs that are created by this massive project, the awesome jobs, the real quality jobs that are going to be created by this project, both in the near term and long term. How do we ensure that those are accessible and prioritized for folks in our communities? And specifically, ramping up and bringing a spotlight to diverse communities, women, when we think about trades and construction and manufacturing, creating programming that allows for that economic opportunity for our underrepresented communities to really take advantage of. That is really, I think, key to driving this home. I think, this bridge is a true opportunity for our region in the sense of creating those careers, those long-term careers. And by continuing to be smart and targeted and equitable in our investment, both in time and money, I think we can really get there. But I think, through those community benefit agreements, we can really have, to Gabby's point, accountability and targeted outcomes around what that means. And specifically as it relates to I think the dominant sectors that we're going to be, that are going to grow to meet this labor force demand of construction and manufacturing. So that excites me. And I think just based on the conversations to date, this project is ready and willing to have those discussions. And so I would say that would be one of my tips or thoughts around what we should focus on next.
Thank you all. So I'm going to go to the question number 3, and this is a question for Miriam, Aiden, and Lisa. And it's what are two specific examples of what equity looks like in infrastructure projects that you have participated in or observed? And maybe we'll kick off with Aiden.
Thank you, Johnell, and thank you, panelists. So many great thoughts and ideas from this brilliant panel we have here today. So, going back to what Greg had mentioned, the history of these infrastructure projects, the contracting was predominantly going to certain contractors, of the minority or the majority community. And so one of the projects that I worked on and under my leadership was the Division Transit project, where the largest minority-owned DBE, otherwise known as Disadvantaged Business Enterprise, was awarded to Raymore Construction for the building of the rapid bus transit for Division Transit. And the purpose of the project really was to just, expedite the public bus transit from Gresham down into downtown Portland and speed up that process for folks. But what came out of that project really was equity. It was, again, awarding the project as a prime to a minority-owned business. And then with that, also having the highest utilization of minority subcontractors and workforce that this region has ever seen. There were other benefits that came out of that project from an equity lens where, not only did we speed up the transit for folks living out in Gresham needing to get into the city for work and other purposes, but also the local businesses around the project area and the residents, helping them thrive by either making building improvements or giving them job opportunities on the contract right in their front or backyard. And so really looking at the project corridor as a whole of how can we lift up everybody in this project area that's, under construction. A lot of times, historically, construction projects will just happen in people's neighborhoods and it's very disruptive. But if you look at it as what is this opportunity for us where we can, help these businesses, help the residents who are living in the area, really take part in this project and thrive. That is one example. Another one, a large infrastructure project where we really focused on the community benefits of the project, looking at not only the pipeline of next generation workforce like Miriam spoke about, looking into the high schools and getting folks that were interested in getting into, infrastructure work, getting them onboarded onto the project and learning, as well as working with folks coming out of incarceration, people with disabilities, people experiencing homelessness, looking at those different populations of people that can thrive and really, build generational wealth from these projects. Also looking at, what are we doing around, construction laydown down areas when we're no longer using them. And so we focused on, the greatest need in that project area, which was to put affordable housing and transit-oriented development. So building that up. So just, a different lens on projects that I've had experience with where we really put an equity lens on it to do things differently and raise people up.
Thank you. Really great perspective. Lisa?
Again, I think there's so many things that there are opportunities to try and to build on the successes from other programs. I think Aiden mentioned kind of workforce. And so I would, say a couple examples. The first is about leadership. It's always about leadership from my perspective. And we have leaders on this program in leadership roles, both from the Department of Transportation, from our partner agencies, and within our consultant team that are from some of those underrepresented communities. And I think from a communicator and someone who is working from a perspective of trying to build trust and relationships with our community, we know that if you look similar, if you have maybe some of a same or shared lived experiences, trust can be built in a different way. And that really is about, Emily mentioned Administrator Johnson shows up at our EAG meetings. I mean, he's showing up, and I just am so grateful he continues to show up in all of the spaces. But he's not the only leader that's showing up, and this program is valuing putting leaders in place that may not have historically ever had an opportunity to be a task lead, to be the owner of a firm and have the opportunity to lean in and be able to provide jobs locally within our community to do this great work. And so I think that's just such an important point. And, you know, again, I think having the leadership committed to building that through a robust internship program and bringing folks in and giving an opportunity to sit at the table with us. So I think this is kind of my first example that leads to my second. We're very excited about hosting some interns in our team, and they actually helped us lead the way to launch some social media that maybe hadn't been done in the past on other programs. And we have a TikTok account, and thank you, Greg. We also have done some really cool, transparent transportation videos, and our ability to think of transportation as something that's relatable, that we can talk about and we can connect with our community really sets us apart. But it is also something that I think other programs are trying to do as well. And so when we bring in leadership that's committed, that's building relationships, and that's building all of that opportunity with maybe young folks that have different ideas, and we're open to accepting and embracing those ideas, other really incredible opportunities for connections occur. And so that's what I think we have done and we're continuing to do. And I would just, throw out a plug for our TikTok channel, because there's some cool stuff that happens on that TikTok channel. You never know what you're going to see. So just another way that we're trying to engage with our community and meet them where they are.
Is TikTok different than Facebook, or is that the same platform?
We're going to do a tutorial after this, Johnell.
Miriam.
Yeah, so agreed with Lisa. There's a lot of potential examples here. I think one that stands out, and it can be very general, but I think I'll name something specific as an example of this one piece here, is using data to inform our decisions when it comes to equity. I think having very clear indicators of and data essentially around outcomes that we want to see on the workforce side, both in training and also in placement into employment, is going to be key. And I've seen this done in other projects. I've seen it attempted in other projects. It can become difficult. It does take a lot of intentionality when thinking about developing out new training programs or investing in and scaling existing to really meet the community where they're at and ensure this economic opportunity that is this bridge to communities that are not currently represented in our sectors of construction, manufacturing. So that's going to take, I think, both political will and also a consistent effort to go back to the data. And so I put that out there. I think that'll be really important. A very good example, I think easy example, would be that in a contract that a percentage of welders hired for a specific part of the bridge would be recruited from a specific training vendor and represented perhaps women of color. Being that drilled down around what we are expecting on the workforce side of this project, I think is going to be necessary. And then I think the second thing is really what IBR is doing just so well is continuing to connect this bridge to the larger picture of what it actually means to our community and our region. Both, bringing it to home through various social media posts, going on bus tours, like riding the public transit back and forth, seeing the experience of what it is to walk across the bridge, like all these different pieces, connecting the dots to Individuals that travel back and forth. I went across the bridge 4 times yesterday to meet with my family and come back to work and, back and forth. So being able to connect this bridge to the larger picture and also, really commit to it and see it as a community change project, I think we'll really be able to let us see our efforts come into fruition as it relates to our, real commitment to equity.
Great, thank you, panel.
Johnell,
Oh, yes, please.
if I could, on that question, two examples came to mind as you asked that question, and one is a very small but a powerful example, and the other is as Gabby was talking about, a longer term equity issue. So when I was a young construction engineer working for the Michigan DOT, we were rebuilding a roadway on the north side of Kalamazoo, and there was never sidewalk there before. The designers were not putting sidewalk back there, but we heard from, this was a minority community, and we heard from the folks that said, where DOT, where you go in other places, you put sidewalks. What about us? And I took that message back, and we found a grant to both design and construct sidewalks. And that's just a small example of, it shouldn't have had to be that, but the DOT did listen and was able to create an equitable situation out of what was going to be an unjust situation. And secondly, a program that I am tremendously fond of. We have a lack of minorities in the DOT world. So one of our pet programs, we partnered with historically Black colleges and universities to offer internships where we would bring students to stay on a college campus. They would work for the DOT during the summer, and they would learn about the master's degree programs at the university. So that's one of a longer term strategy of how do you get more communities, more people who belong to those communities of concern into the pipeline, so there can be more an equitable lens at all levels of these projects. So I just wanted to throw those two examples in there.
Excellent examples in the pipeline, Greg, as you indicated, is so critically important, both in terms of construction as well as in professional services. We need them both. Question for Emily and Gabby. So we've heard a lot from the panel in terms of some examples nationally, as well as locally, in terms of how we really steward and advance equity. We've unpacked a fair amount in terms of what IBR is doing in tandem with the Equity Advisory Group. But as I always say, if you don't measure it, then you don't achieve it. And so how can we measure success regarding equity on infrastructure projects? And Emily, why don't we kick off with you?
Yeah, I think this is a really important question. And, we've talked quite a bit here tonight about process and outcome equity. And, I really think of those as kind of two areas, two buckets where we can, envision measuring success for equity. So in terms of process equity, through the great community engagement that we've done, as well as the advisory groups, it's really ensuring that we have given sufficient opportunities and for folks from underrepresented communities to have their voices heard. And a part of how we can really measure that and hold ourselves accountable is through the great accountability dashboard that has been created and is on the IBR program website. And what that does is really reports out all the different, touch points and engagements that the program has done with folks, how many people they've interacted with, just clear, tangible examples of what's been done so far, and making sure that we're really on track with meeting those goals. And then in terms of outcome equity, as we move forward in the different phases of the project, there's going to be a development of equity specific performance measures or key performance indicators. And, the equity advisory group is going to be essential in helping the development of those. And those are going to be really great, tangible, measurable, quantitative ways that we can see, how are we really hitting these objectives. And, again, that's just going to be something that can be reported out, can be tracked over time, and is really going to help encourage transparency. And I think that transparency is really a key when we look at, how we ensure success in advancing equity. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. Gabby?
When I think about measuring success, I think about knowing better and doing better, right? It's like a thing you remember your mom telling you, you know better, you can do better, right? And so I like to think about how to implement metrics that we essentially outline different pieces of criteria and a ranking system between on a scale of 1 to 5, because that means that over time we can get better, right? If there are some criteria points where we're seeing a 2 or a 3, that's not a fail, it's just something to draw your attention to, right? And on a long-term project, it's good to be able to have that show of progress and demonstration of progress over time. So I would apply this in 2 different ways. I think there are internal metrics of success, and I think there are external metrics of success. Emily, I think you talked about both, but obviously on the public engagement side, being more of that external space, some of the workforce development comments that Miriam was sharing as well earlier, or some of those external metrics that you can measure. But internally, one way to use that scale system is on different project concepts or scenarios that are being evaluated on technical decisions. So we can develop equity criteria in terms of the impacts we think different choices might have on the community. And on a scale of 1 to 5, we can say how, to what degree do we think this particular concept is at risk of causing this impact on a scale of 1 to 5. And again, it doesn't mean you throw out the concept, but if there's a concept that's ranking a little bit higher, maybe you move forward to a future round. If there's a concept that's ranking a little bit lower, you're able to say, well, what could we do differently here? Maybe there's something to add on or tweak about it, right? The last thing that I'll say is that I think we've been discussing what metrics of success look like for the foreseeable future to support our work right now. But I would also say that there's a part 2 later in the future that I see in terms of measuring success through doing neighborhood change assessments and things post-implementation. And that's a great way to see if our intentions actually align with our impacts. And of course, at that point, there may be other contributors in terms of other development that's happened in the community. Of course, this wouldn't be the only project in the same time span, but it's a great way to sort of look back. I think when we wrap up our projects, we have a way of jumping to the next one. And this is a good way to sort of pause and reflect and look back and take those lessons learned forward.
Love that. I think that's a really great idea. Now we're going to go to our audience questions, and I have a first one that we're going to kick off to Greg, which is how is IBR program engaging tribes to ensure that their interests shape decisions being made?
So we are engaging with 11 tribal governments who have expressed interest in participating with the IBR program. So we meet on a monthly basis with both the Cowlitz tribe and the Grand Ronde tribe. We also have tribal members who are a part of the community advisory group as well as the equity advisory group. So we are doing some robust outreach to the tribes. We went and visited the Yakima tribe in Eastern Washington, and we have plans on visiting with other tribes to make sure that their voice is heard and reflected in this. We know that the tribes have a have a special relationship. They are a government, and we have government to government consultation strategies and meetings with the tribe. So we are being very intentional in our outreach to the tribes.
Thank you, Greg. And for the audience, just a reminder, you may email us your questions at info@interstatebridge.org. Once again, that's info@interstatebridge.org. There has been a lot of conversation relative to workforce and what this project might mean in terms of advancing a decade worth of work. Miriam, maybe I'll kick this off to you and would welcome other panelists to chime in. Given the experience required for jobs this project will provide, how do we start training our community to fill these positions to ensure equitable access to them?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. It's a little overwhelming at times to consider and think about the workforce demand that's going to come with this project. We can start now. I mean, we as an organization at WSW have been doing this work for years around career awareness and career exploration, investing in it through our partners and the community college system and the university and K-12. We continue to do that. I think ideally there can be an increased focus on occupations that will be bolstered by this project. So having a clear understanding, the beginning would be to have a clear understanding of what are the jobs that we're going to be seeing come from this project specifically. And then I think working back from there to see what are we currently able to produce in terms of talent as a region, assess the gap, and then be able to continue to invest in training and grow investment in training that will get us to meet the demands, I think, of the project. Right now, I think we need to have a really, I think knowing, what those occupations are going to be, and then being able to see what the investment is going to need to be to meet that need for training as well is going to be an important conversation. I think, exploration, preparation is something that ideally starts as early as elementary, middle school, and is a continuous effort across multiple community partners. What I love about workforce development is that many organizations and, community centers and schools are doing workforce development, whether they know it or not. When talking about what you want to be when you grow up, that conversation and being able to show the really wide array of opportunities out there, and then connecting it to, the bridge, like connecting it to spaces and places in their community, to show that that is something that they can contribute to, I think is really beneficial too. But to answer your question, I think we really have to get down to brass tacks around which specific occupations we're looking at needing to fill and train for, and then really work backwards from that with all of our training, our wonderful training providers in the community to be able to meet that need. So research, data mining, and then I think funding development is going to be really key too, as early as tomorrow probably. It's going to be really important. And then the last thing I'll say about that too, I think when it comes to the choosing of contractors for this work, having an investment as well from them in workforce development, whether it's incumbent worker training, so investing in their existing workforce and providing very clear career pathways within the occupations that we're going to support with this project, as well as new training investment is going to be key too. So we can't keep running, I think, from grant to grant. There needs to be a clear, stable investment to meet the need of these projects. So I'd hope that to be a part of the conversation too.
Great, thank you so much. Hayden, you want to jump in on this one?
Sure. Thank you, Miriam. You're spot on. So I also think that we need to, look at all the areas where workforce exists and there's potential. And we also need to lean on all of our partners in this work. We know that across the nation, there is a workforce shortage just across the board. And so looking outside the box, thinking outside of the box, as I had mentioned before, looking at populations that, are often overlooked, those coming out of incarceration, people experiencing homelessness, people that, are in different walks of life that, may not be high schoolers or elementary school, but individuals who may just want a different career shift. And so reaching out, thinking outside of the box. But Miriam's exactly right. We need to first delve deep into the different areas where we know we're going to need to raise up workforce, and then start those conversations now and put the funding behind it. So I absolutely agree.
That's terrific. Our next audience question is, how is the program engaging immigrant communities? And Elisa, I would like for you to kind of unpack that a bit.
Well, I think first, we are working with community-based organizations that specialize in working with our immigrant communities. And so again, I think I made a comment earlier about building trust and relationships. And so I really, believe that it's the work of our equity team embedded in our communications work that has led us to create these very important relationships with our community-based organizations. And in fact, there have been some really good small mini grants that have been awarded to some of these organizations for specifically their work to engage communities that might be hesitant to engage with a big infrastructure project. And I think back to, hundreds of years ago, and you think about transportation being vital, and you think about civil rights movements, and you think about kind of just protests and marches and how infrastructure has impacted lives. And then you think about these immigrant communities that are trying to understand, connect, and even just think about the impact that this may have on them and their families. It creates a greater burden on a transportation project to find ways to build relationships and to make sure that we're listening to all of our community. And so I would say this is, again, another great example of how our equity team is leading with tangible ways with our community-based organizations to have them partner with us and not ask them to do something for free, but ask them to bring the value and the leadership and the connections and the relationships that they have as part of the team to help us do our work together.
Thank you for that. Greg, I want to ask you a question and unpack it a little bit. You have been pretty public about the experiences of being a young man and watching your father's home that he built be torn apart at the advent of the freeway system on the East Coast. How has that lived experience directed you, guided you as program administrative of IBR?
So Johnell, it has actually guided me throughout my career as a transportation professional. So when I was 4 years old, my family was relocated. We lived in Mount Clemens, Michigan, and the State Highway Department at the time came through and said, yeah, we're building a boulevard section. We need your house. So at the time, I thought it was good fun. I was, got to live with my grandparents and got to live with my uncles. And at the time, I didn't realize the stress and the pain that it caused my father. He felt that he was not treated fairly. He felt that there was no input that he could have given that would have changed that decision. And so as long as I can remember, he told me that story and his frustration with them. And plus the fact that he wanted to work for the State Highway Department, could not get a job at the State Highway Department, but yet they took his home. So that, him telling me that story impacted how I approach equity and equity issues with communities that are not well represented. I've sat in homes in Southwest Detroit, in Baltimore, in various areas around the country, talking to people about how they can participate, how they can make their voice be heard. So coming to this program, this was a natural fit for me to come here and help drive equity as, once again, both a process and a outcome. So it has been very meaningful for me, my history and my first even unconscious interaction with the transportation system here in the United States.
Thank you for sharing that story, Greg, and for your leadership. Now we have a question really speaking to our process side of things, which is, what are the plans for threading stakeholder feedback into the IBR program going forward? And maybe I'll look to both Lisa as well as Emily to touch upon that. Starting off with Lisa.
Well, I think I've already said this. I don't want to keep saying the same thing. You know, it's about building that relationship with the community and continuing to listen to the community. And so it's important that throughout the process, as technical as it may get, which right now we're in a pretty technical part of the process, that we're continuing to engage and we're continuing to really find meaningful ways for our community to stay involved and to share their feedback. Having so many different groups and organizations and community members engaged with the program is both an opportunity and it is a responsibility that we ensure that we are finding ways to engage in a meaningful way and not just pushing information out, but pushing information out that allows for capacity to be built within the community so that by the time we get to the end of this first phase of this environmental process, our community is ready to lean in with really good comments. And it's challenging to ask maybe a year from now for the community to provide feedback on highly technical environmental information if we haven't helped our community to understand what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how they can be involved. So I think that commitment is a commitment that happened very early on in the program and just continues throughout the program.
Thank you. Emily?
Yeah, and I think to answer this question, what comes to mind is some of the different ways that we collect feedback, you know, obviously through the engagement events that we've talked about in the advisory groups, but also things like community surveys and things like that. You know, each of these are different inputs that are used, you know, to inform the decisions that are happening at the time. And, you know, even for the community survey, we have made a point to make sure that it's very accessible to all folks. So folks with disabilities or maybe limited vision, we have, you know, worked with EAG members on how we can make that more accessible for folks so that they can really provide their feedback too, because we don't want to miss those opportunities, you know, due to lack of accessibility. So that's an example of some of the things that we do, but also want to touch back on the accountability dashboard that I mentioned. You know, that's another way where we are reporting out some of the specific things that we have heard, the work that's been going on. And as part of this, you know, there will be reports that will be shared on the dashboard for how feedback from, you know, the equity advisory group and other things and how the equity framework is being integrated into the decisions by the different program teams. So those are some, you know, really tangible ways that the program is looking to, you know, transparently show how the feedback is being incorporated, because that's one of the number one questions we get from the public and from the equity advisory group is what's happening with our feedback. And so it's really important for us to be able to show that, you know, yes, we hear you, but it doesn't stop there. We're actually doing something with it, and we can point to what that is.
Thank you. Now a question for Gabby, for our audience and those who may not know, WSP is our lead consultant, what we call the general engineering consultant, reporting directly to Greg and our team. Gabby, tell us a little bit about this Equity Center of Excellence, and how did that come about, and what type of work are you all doing across the nation to really advance equity in these types of programs?
Sure. So the Equity Center of Excellence is about 1 year old. And it is really a formalization of an effort within WSP's culture that existed before the formal professional services group was developed. So a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic years, myself and a few other folks that were on the West Coast started a little working group of folks that were interested in equity and figuring out how to build it into our work more meaningfully. And the group started with like 3, 5, 10, it became a California group instead of a NorCal group. And so we started to realize over time that there were different equity champions or equity practitioners that were sort of on different islands throughout the US, so to speak. We want to figure out how to centralize that effort. So we did that in 2 ways. We now have a national equity working group, which is our sort of informal think tank. We meet on a bi-weekly basis, and it's a great space for knowledge share. We talk about where our clients are at, where different projects are at. We do little mini presentations to each other on topics we're interested in. A few weeks ago, we did one about how to deal with the fact that the 2020 census data has a larger margin of error than it has in previous years, and how do you rely on that data, and whether or not, you know, we're giving guidance to use 2020 data or 2019 data, etc. So there's that sort of informal think tank, and that's about 100 folks deep. That think tank really inspired the formal ECE, as we call it, or Equity Center of Excellence. So we are a national team. Myself, I'm one of the co-leads of that group. We are a diverse group as well, and we each have different core competencies in our backgrounds. So we're able to lean on each other really well in that way. We also are really great about thinking about the intersection of different community projects or public projects, because we work on transportation projects, housing, water, utilities, all of these things that sort of converge to create quality of life, especially in equity communities. To be more specific, some of our services include public engagement plans, equity education trainings, building out frameworks, helping clients define equity for specific projects within the project context, building those measurable equity goals, and really partnering with technical experts to walk them through what it looks like to action equity on their end. So anyway, I hope that's a helpful overview of what the Equity Center of Excellence is.
Well, that's exciting. Thank you for sharing that. Once again, thank you to this terrific panel for your wonderful participation and great just content. So just on behalf of the program, thank you for that. For those watching, just want to also thank you for spending your evening with us. If we did not get to your question, please do email us at info@interstatebridge.org. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Greg. Greg?
Thank you, Johnell. This has been a very invigorating panel, invigorating discussion. This is an issue that is, once again, tremendously important. With the new funding that has come from the Biden administration, has come focus areas. They want us to focus on being better, climate-wise, to make sure that if we are building infrastructure, that it meets a standard of not degrading the climate any further or improving the climate, and also equity. And this is a new focus. This has not been, there have been practitioners of equity in transportation in pockets, but this is the first time it has reached that national level of importance of saying that we are going to change the dynamic of what has happened in the past and how we can be better going into the future. One of the first things that Johnell told me when I came here is to lead in equity, you must understand the history. And so he gave me information about whether it was the Vanport flood, the destruction of the Albina neighborhood, the gentrification of the remainder of the Albina neighborhood. And so we have been consciously talking to our team about educating themselves. One of our upcoming lunch and learns will be on what happened in Port Angeles with the Lord Elwha, and how that tribe tried to warn the DOT about there was human remains in an area where the DOT wanted to build a facility. So all of these things point to we are becoming better. We're becoming more informed. We're becoming a tremendously action-oriented. We're not just listening just to hear, but we're listening to hear, understand, and then take action on a number of issues that we hear in the equity world. I was participating in a Washington State DOT gathering with the DBE and small business community. And there is a hunger for folks who want to have access to programs like the IBR. And they want to understand how they can prepare themselves and be a part of it. So our role is to, number one, not only open the door, but hold the door open so they can become that active participant. And once again, they can go from a small business to a large business. I've known firms that have gone from having a shovel and a wheelbarrow to now being a multi-million-dollar enterprise that does some of the largest work in the country. This can be the story of some of the firms that we are trying to reach out to. So it begins with having a knowledge of what has come before us and having the resolve to want to change it. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for participating. This panel has been absolutely tremendous. And we will be doing more of these type of roundtable discussions on different topics on equity as we move into the future. So please look for us, follow us on Facebook and all our social media accounts. But once again, thank you so much for your participation.
Thank you, Greg. And just a few notes. I just want to add that Monday was World of Migrants and Refugees, and we are in the midst of the Hispanic Latinx Heritage Month. So just a special shout out to all of our staff who celebrate this time. The diversity among the staff here at IBR is so valuable, and making sure we have people with the lived experience and the knowledge to really center equity. And also want to thank you, Greg, for those words. Just a reminder for folks watching to please join us in December for a roundtable discussion titled Accessibility Throughout Infrastructure Projects, to hear about local advocates and professionals about the work to make infrastructure and transportation projects accessible for persons living with disabilities, from conversations on purposes and needs to construction. Again, thank you all for joining us tonight, and big shout out to our panel for your work on IBR as well as your work in our broader community. Have a great evening, everyone. Thank you so much.